in your laptop or cell phone. Okay. So this chapter is actually a book chapter, and it is a bit different. The organization of this chapter is a bit different from the all the chapters that we have covered so far. But if you spend the next hour with me, being attentive, it will be easier for you to understand. Hopefully when you give it a read, it should not be difficult. But yeah, it deals with a concept which is very new and very different, so that's why I encourage you to be attentive as much as possible. Okay, just checking whether I am audible clearly, and whether you have the article with you. Do we have the article with us, people?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. So first, can anyone tell me who is the author of this chapter? Does anyone know? So his name is Kumara Vadivelu. Kumara Vadivelu. He is a Sri Lankan researcher. His name is Kumara Vadivelu. And in this chapter, first and foremost, he talks about the concept of method. He talks about that how, what does method mean? কে বলতে পারবে? কার মনে আছে method কি? We are almost at the end of this course, people. What is method?
It's kind of
Method is
like,
overall plan.
Overall plan, okay. Someone else want to
yeah,
say?
like step by step process to reach an
Step
approach.
by step process. Right. Not reach an approach. Approach approach এর বেসিসই তো তুমি পাচ্ছ মেথডটা। Step by step process ঠিক আছে, but who are the ones who are giving the methods actually? এই মেথডসটা কারা ডেভেলপ করছে, কারা দিচ্ছে জানি?
The theory.
Miss
The
teachers,
theory. No,
it's my set
not
of beliefs যেটা হচ্ছে টিচাররা ইউজ করছে ক্লাস
that
নেওয়ার
is
জন্য।
assumption. That is assumption, that is belief, that is the approach. But in case of method, the step by step বা overall idea or plan, এটা তো designed by the theorist, right? The theorists, not the teachers.
Yes,
The
ma'am.
methods are actually designed. First and foremost, you people are right. These are a structured or step-by-step process in terms of which is based on the approach, but it is the step-by-step process or outline. But then again, who are the designers, who are the people who are coming up with this method? That is important. And Methods are actually proposed and designed by theorizers or theorists. And they are designing these methods for the teachers so that they, or ELT practitioners, so that they can use this method in their classroom to teach the language, right? So teachers are not really the, they are not part of the development of the methods. The methods are actually designed by the theorists or the theorizers who are designing the methods, and we are disseminating them and thinking that the teachers will be using it or adopting it, রাইট? এই জিনিসটা একটু মাথায় রাখা জরুরি যে এই মেথডগুলো আসলে কারা দিচ্ছে। মেথডরা আসলে দিচ্ছে হচ্ছে গিয়ে the theorist or the theorizer or the researchers most of the time who do not really have any expertise in terms of teaching. People who are more into theory, developing ideas, and more into research as opposed to having practical or experience in terms of teaching. So এটা কিন্তু দুটো গ্রুপ হয়ে গেল, একটা হচ্ছে কি থিওরিস্টরা আর হচ্ছে কি টিচার্সরা। মেথড যেগুলো আমরা পেয়েছি লার্সেন ফ্রিম্যানের বইতে, আমরা যে কটা মেথড, আচ্ছা আমরা কয়টা মেথড পড়েছি পিপল, হাউ মেনি মেথডস ইউ হ্যাভ কভার্ড, হু ক্যান টেল মি? We started off with GTM, grammar translation method, then
Ma'am,
direct
then
The
direct
method,
method
direct method.
and
yeah,
audiolingual method,
audiolingual method, very good. Then
Silent method.
silent method,
silent way,
Desuggestopedia, total physical
PDO,
response.
total physical response, task based,
TBSD,
task-based
CLP.
method.
yeah. So এই যে আমরা ডিফারেন্ট ডিফারেন্ট পড়ছি, প্রত্যেকটা ক্ষেত্রে we got some principles, we got some techniques. So what were they? They were actually some established procedures which were given or proposed by people who have expertise in the field of research, in the field of theory development, right? So what Kumaravadi Velu in this chapter, what he does, he first and foremost talks about the concept of method, the very concept. So see, the term methods, যদি একটু স্ক্রিনের দিকে তাকাও তোমরা, the term methods is currently used in the literature on second and foreign language teaching, does not refer to what teachers actually do in the classroom. Rather, it refers to established methods conceptualized and constructed by experts in the field. এই লাইনটা দিয়ে বুঝিয়ে দিচ্ছে যে মেথড বলতে আসলে টিচার ক্লাসে কি করছে, দ্যাট ইজ নট দ্য কেস। মেথড হচ্ছে গিয়ে এস্টাবলিশড, conceptualized, constructed by theorizers or theorists who have expertise in the field theoretically, right? So তোমাদের এটা বুঝতে হবে যে in terms of the method development there is no role the teacher plays. Teachers আসলে এই method development এ কোনো রোল নেই। মনে করো যে কোনো একজন রিসার্চার যারা থিওরি ডেভেলপ করে, থিওরাইজার্সরা, মেবি দ্যাট পারসন ডাজন্ট হ্যাভ এনি এক্সপার্টিস or any experience in teaching, but theoretically he is or she is aware of how people acquire language, what are the drawbacks of second language acquisition, এই ধরনের আইডিয়া তাদের কাছে আছে, and based on that they are developing theory. So they can be termed either theorists or theorizers, দুটো টার্ম ইউজ করতে পারো, either theorizers or theorists. So they are the one who are providing with this kind of established methods which are conceptualized and constructed by them, and they have expertise in the field of theory development or language acquisition and language development, right? So এখানে অনেকগুলো মেথডের কথা বলা হয়েছে that over the period of time there are different methods came into being, এখানে অনেকগুলো আমরা পড়ে ফেলেছি, বাট এই যে তোমরা এতগুলো মেথড পড়েছো, and I think I talked about it before we discussed eclecticism, that how all these methods are not essentially too much distinct from each other. You all agreed that many of the methods are actually sharing different or similar type of principles, right? So the author said it would be wrong to assume that these 11 methods or methods altogether provide 11 different paths to language teaching. In fact, there is considerable overlap in their theoretical as well as practical approaches to second language learning and teaching. Sometimes, what appears to be a radically new method is more often than not a variant of existing methods presented with the fresh paint of a new terminology that camouflages their fundamental similarity. So, what Kumara Valdivelu is suggesting, যে method designed by, conceptualized and constructed by people who have expertise in the field of theory development. They are coming up with with one, and one after one they're coming up with different methods. So one method comes into being, it gets practiced, it faces criticism, then addressing those criticism, another method comes into being. এভাবে করেই তো we got so many methods, right? But what Kumara Vadivelu is saying that, although we have different, let's say 11 methods, but all these methods are not really too distinct from each other. Often they are similar, they share their similar kind of principles and beliefs, and often it is the case that people are served the same old wine in new bottle. সেম ওয়াইন ইন নিউ বটলটা মানে কি, মানে যে একই জিনিস হয়তো বা তোমাকে একটু একটু মানে ঘষে মেজে একটু হয়তো বা নতুন নাম টাম দিয়ে তোমাকে প্রেজেন্ট করছে, সেটাই বলছে। কিন্তু দেখো যে দে আর ফ্রেশ পেইন্ট অফ আ নিউ টার্মিনোলজি দ্যাট ক্যামোফ্লেজেস देयर ফান্ডামেন্টাল সিমিলারিটি, যে হয়তো একটা পুরনো জিনিসই বাট একটু নতুন রং টং দিয়ে নতুন টার্ম দিয়ে মানুষের কাছে প্রেজেন্ট করা হয়েছে, বাট এসেনশিয়ালি মোর অর লেস দে আর দ্য সেম অর সিমিলার। So 11 methods যে খুবই distinct, খুবই different কিছু propose করছে, it's not like that. You can actually see that there are similarities among the methods, and often different different method is simply having different terms and perhaps different and that is perhaps a new thing, that's all. It is essentially the same old concept. So um, based on that, since methods are not too distinct from each other, Kumaravadivelu took all the methods and he believes that all these methods can be broadly classified into three categories. One can be language centered methods, other one can be learner centered method, and the third one can be learning centered method. Language, learner and learning, তিনটা term. Language centered, learner centered and learning centered. সবাই দেখতে পাচ্ছ স্ক্রিনে?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Okay.
miss.
So what is your understanding? আমি এখানে রেখে যদি তোমাদের জিজ্ঞেস করি, what do you think among the methods that we covered in our class so far, what could be those methods which can fall under the classification of language centered method?
Grammar translation,
Why do you think that?
because it focuses on the structure of language, reading, and all
Right,
that type.
right. So language centered method বলতে সেই মেথডগুলোই বোঝাবে যেখানে ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজের উপর এমফাসিস দেওয়া হচ্ছে, the knowledge on the language or linguistic aspect of the language, right? So in terms of language centered method, দেখো language centered methods are those that are principally concerned with linguistic forms, also called grammatical structure. GTM bolo, audiolingual method bolo, these are some examples which provide opportunities for learners to practice pre-selected, pre-sequenced linguistic structures through form focused exercises in class. তাহলে তোমাদের মনে রাখতে সুবিধা হবে যদি তোমরা চিন্তা করো যে ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ সেন্টার্ড মেথডস আর ফর্ম ফোকাস মেথডস। তো যেখানে আমরা ফর্ম ফোকাস, আমরা অনেকবার বলেছি দ্যাট এনি মেথড ওয়্যার দ্য primary focus or importance is on learning the grammatical aspect, learning the, let's say, the vocabulary element and all these things will fall under language centered method. সো কেন এটাকে প্রি সিলেক্টেড প্রি সিকোয়েন্স বলা হচ্ছে, ওই যে আমরা আমরা সব সময় অল থ্রু আওয়ার লাইফ, থ্রু ইউ উইল whether it's school or college, we always had, let's say, translation, যে রহিম ভালো ছেলে, রবীন্দ্রনাথ বিশ্বকবি, সূর্য পূর্ব দিকে উঠে। এই যে ধরনের প্রি সিলেক্টেড প্রি সিকোয়েন্স লিঙ্গুইস্টিক স্ট্রাকচার যেটা often are very stilted, very unnatural, very devoid by from the real life use, right? That's why these examples or techniques will fall under language centered method, যেখানে there is a tendency of having language exercises which are pre-selected and pre-sequenced. And if you look at it, according to this belief, language development is largely intentional rather incidental, that is, it takes place through conscious effort, as in the case of adult L2 learning, and not through unconscious processes as in the case of child L1 acquisition. So বলছে যে এই language centered method গুলো এটাই বিলিভ করে যে learning should be very focal. The attention needs to be very focal. Students need to have the intention to learn something, and it cannot be learned peripherally or incidentally, right? And therefore there is over analysis, over importance on the grammatical and linguistic aspects. So if you, and it is very easier for us since we all have gone through GTM, so we all can relate that how in GTM the focus was more on the linguistic elements, the pre-selected and pre-sequenced activities or exercises that we were supposed to do, and how it was very conscious, very over analysis of grammatical items was there, so that we have focal attention to all these things, right? Also, in case of language centered methods, they treat language to be a linear and additive process. এবং তোমাদের সবার মনে থাকার কথা, when we got to the syllabus, let's say যখন আমরা স্কুল কলেজ সিলেবাস পেতাম, তখন দেখতাম যে কিভাবে এগুলো সাজানো আছে, যে প্রথমে লেটস সে আর্টিকেল পড়ানো হবে, প্রোনাউন পড়ানো হবে, অ্যাডজেক্টিভ তারপর পড়ানো হবে, অ্যাডভার্ব, এভাবে করে ক্রনোলজিক্যালি একটা সাজানো হতো। তার মানে কি, it is a very linear and additive process. Once you are done with article, then you can move on to pronoun, then you can move on to verb, then you can move on to adverb, then perhaps you can move on to the tense, then you can move on to the narration. So very additive, একটার পর একটা add করে 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 you are learning the language, right? So in case of language centered methods, the whole process of language learning is seen to be very additive and very linear process. So that is the case of GTM. In case of GTM, we also had this, that we are not taking, you people are all already aware, you have also taken exams where I asked you that how language is not about bits and pieces, and you have to think holistically. এই কনসেপ্টটা এখানে চলে আসে যে in case of GTM, in case of language centered method, it takes language to be a language learning process to be very linear and additive process, and therefore one things get added to the existing one, খুব accumulated ভাবে এভাবে করে আগায়। Therefore we also get to see that how there is a gradual development in terms of the activities or concepts which are from simpler to concepts. So simple হয়তো বা আমরা প্রথমে আর্টিকেল শিখছি, প্রোনাউন শিখছি, ধীরে 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 প্রেপোজিশন শিখছি, ধীরে 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 হয়তো বা আমরা টেন্স, দেন ন্যারেশন, এই কমপ্লেক্স জিনিসগুলো শিখছি। তো because of the fact that language centered methods treat language to be a very linear and additive process. So the teacher's task is to introduce them one at a time and help the learner practice them until the learner internalizes them. Secondly, language centered methods generally advocate explicit introduction, analysis, and explanation of linguistic systems. So এগুলো বলেছি যে how in this method you get to see or get to have very over analysis of grammatical items as well. That is, they believe that linguistic systems are simple enough and that our explanatory power is sophisticated enough to provide explicit rules of thumb and explain them in such a way that the learner can understand and assimilate them. So বলছে যে it is important to give over analysis. It is important to let them know that how subject third person singular plural hole is by es hobe, and how these things are there. So age structure, age different types of sentences, how to construct all these things. Students need these over analysis so that they have an idea or understanding. They will be able to perhaps remember or memorize, and perhaps will be better able to practice in their in their test or exams. So now you understand what are the language centered method and how it works. We already, I would say we already knew it, but to perhaps classify them and to see that how among all the methods we have covered so far, how there are, let's say, GTM and ALM যেগুলো language centered method এর মধ্যে পড়ে। তারপরে বলছে learner centered method. Now in case of learner centered method, essentially methods which are concerned with language use and learner needs. ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজের ইউজ এবং লার্নারের নিড, এই দুটো যখন আসবে তখন আমরা মানে এই দুটো যখন অ্যাড্রেস করা হবে যে মেথডে, we will classify them as learner centered method. যে কোনো কমিউনিকেটিভ মেথড যেখানে পিপল অর স্টুডেন্টস গেট টু ইউজ their language, their ability, their skill, those will fall under learner centered method, right? So if you look at the definition, learner centered methods are those that are principally concerned with language use and learner needs. These methods seek to provide opportunities for learners to practice pre-selected, pre-sequenced grammatical structures as well as communicative functions. তার মানে হচ্ছে গিয়ে এখানে the emphasis is not entirely communication, it is more like having a balance between, let's say, grammatical items, so focus on form as well as focus on meaning. So দুটোই আছে, grammatical structure কে completely deny করা হচ্ছে না, the students need to exercise or have exercises on grammatical aspect, but at the same time they should be given opportunities so that they can also use in a given situation. So when we talked about communicative language teaching approach, we talked about that how teachers are encouraged to have more STT or student talk time. And you know, even in that case, I think I discussed that how a teacher always can have an underlying focus on the grammatical aspect as well. You can assign any activity, but at the same time there should be an underlying focus on the grammatical structure as well. And I remember that one of the groups actually presented, and I kind of showed the connection with their technique and the underlying grammatical focus that the particular activity had, right? So any communicative activity will fall under communicative method will fall under learner centered method, where there is a balance between um, balance in the sense that there are some, let's say, element where students are given to communicate, students are given opportunities to communicate so they can use the language, and at the same time they are practicing the grammatical aspects as well, right? So the idea is the learner centered methods try to make language learners grammatically accurate as well as communicatively fluent. So দুটোই যাতে হয়, কমিউনিকেটিভলি ফ্লুয়েন্ট হলো কিন্তু রাজ্যের গ্রামাটিক্যাল এরর করলো, এটা যাতে না হয়। সো গ্রামারটাও থাকলো, আবার ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ ইউজটাও শিখলো, দুটোই যাতে হয়। এটার জন্যই হচ্ছে কি এই লার্নার সেন্টার্ড মেথড, where the focus is on both language use and learners need। ঠিক আছে, দুটোই থাকবে। এই পর্যন্ত সবাই বুঝেছি?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
ওকে, তাহলে তোমরা বলো, তাহলে লার্নিং সেন্টার্ড মেথড কি হবে? তোমাদের কি মনে হয়? What could be learning centered method?
Ma'am, focus on
Ma'am, silent
communication
twin.
শুধু।
Focus on only communication? Okay, let's find out. Learning centered methods are those that are principally concerned with learning processes. Learning process কিভাবে শিখছে, how they are learning. Are they learning the same way that they are learning their first language? Are they learning in an environment where they are relaxed and they can easily grab things? So the process of learning এর যে প্রসেসটা, তারা কোন জায়গায় কিভাবে কোন ধরনের এনভায়রনমেন্টে এক্সপোজড, in what process they're going through, that is the headache of learning centered methods. So learning centered methods are those that are principally concerned with learning processes. These methods seek to provide opportunities for learners to participate in open-ended meaningful interaction through communicative activities or problem-solving tasks in class. The assumption is that a preoccupation with meaning making will ultimately lead to grammatical as well as communicative mastery of the language, and that learners can learn through the process of communication. In this approach, unlike the other two, language development is considered more incidental than intentional. So to some extent you are right when you say that it is more into the language use, it is more into meaning making. So বলছে যে আসলে স্টুডেন্টদেরকে ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজটা ইউজ করতে দিতে হবে, এবং করতে দিলেই করতে করতে থ্রু প্র্যাকটিস থ্রু ইন্টারাকশন। সো if you want to make students interact, how can you do it? You have to do it through interaction. There is no other way. You can't really teach them about interaction by giving a lecture. You have to make them interact so that you have an interactive classroom, otherwise it doesn't work. So what Kumara Vadhavan is suggesting in terms of the learning centered method, the idea is that students will automatically get the mastery of grammatical, concept or knowledge, as well as communicative, if they are given enough chances to have conversation, to have communication. A communication process through they will develop in terms of both language, let's say grammar, as well as communication, right? So in terms of learning centered method, it focuses on the learning process, and it believes that through the process of learning, the students will automatically gain mastery over grammar as well as communication. এ পর্যন্ত সবাই বুঝেছি?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, what Kumar Vedagulu does first and foremost, he talks about the concept of method, then he identifies three classifies essentially all the methods into three broad category. তার কারণটা কি? তার কারণটা এটাই যে উনি মনে করেন যে এই 11টা মেথড বা 6টা মেথড বা 7টা মেথড প্রত্যেকটা যে খুব ডিফারেন্ট, খুবই ডিস্টিংক্ট, ইটস নট লাইক দ্যাট। They are quite similar, and based on the similarities or the, let's say, the underlying belief or approach, he tried to classify all these methods into three broad category. And I think it makes sense, and I think it makes easier to kind of um, let's say classify the similar type of methods under one umbrella, right? So galo language centered, learner centered, and learning centered. So three types method galo. Now then he talks about এগুলো সব পড়ে নিবে, এগুলো it's he's explaining different studies, and it is book chapter, so it has information from other books and other studies, and he is trying to develop, he is trying to propose something. So before that he has to make the ground that why he's proposing what he's proposing. Okay, so তারপরে দেখো he talks about the limitations of the concept of method. So উনি বলছেন যে এই যে মেথড, এই যে structured or designed by, pre constructed by people who has expertise in the field of theory development, এই যে এখানে একটা প্রবলেম আছে, একটা লিমিটেশন আছে। কি লিমিটেশন আছে একটু দেখি, দেখো, the disjunction between method as conceptualized by theorists and method as conducted by teachers. So at the very beginning I asked you that who are the ones who came up with the concept of method, and you people thought that it is the teachers, but we identified that the role of the teachers is merely none. There is no role that the teachers play in terms of method development. These are actually coming from people, theorizers, theorists having expertise in the field of theory development, and also language learning and acquisition, all these things. So first and foremost, the idea is that the methods that are coming from the theorist uh, do have certain limitation. And why he's saying this? He's saying this because first and foremost, methods are based on idealized concepts geared toward idealized context. মানেটা কি? Methods are methods are based on idealized concepts geared toward idealized context.
I mean, it does not actually cater to every situation. It has one ideal situation in mind and then make concepts regarding that.
Right, very good. So since we know, and since one, যে এবার বই যে পড়ছি লার্সন ফ্রিম্যানের, এখানে অনেকগুলো মেথডের কথা বলা হয়েছে, বাট we get an idea that who are the theorizers. Most of them are from either east or west.
Way.
West. So most of them are developed, most of these theories are developed or methods are developed by people from West. And they have their context to be the ideal one. They think that their context is the ideal one, and whatever suits them, whatever works for them, perhaps will also work in the rest of the world. So each concept, each very notion or very idea that my concept is suitable or has universal appeal will be able to be fit in any part of the world. This very idea is flawed. So that is the first limitation of the concept of method, that it is based on idealized concepts geared towards idealized context, considering their context to be the correct one or the ideal one, and the way language is taught in their context is the ideal way of teaching. This very concept is flawed. কেন বলছে এটা flawed? Since language learning and teaching needs wants and situations are unpredictably numerous, no idealized method can visualize all the variables in advance. In order to provide situation-specific suggestions that practicing teachers sorely need to tackle the challenges they confront every day of their professional lives. So different contexts, different teacher are facing different kind of problem, are are dealing with different kind of students altogether. So there is no way যে একটা কনটেক্সট যেটা সুইটেবল যেটা যেটা সুইটেবল মনে হচ্ছে সেটা যে অন্য কোনো কনটেক্সটে অন্য কোনো লার্নার্সদের নিড ফুলফিল করবে. So that is the first limitation of the concept of method, that it is not context sensitive. It is not aware of the differences between or among different contexts. It is very geared towards an idealized context, and therefore all the concepts or ideas that they propose are very idealized. So theorizers believe that their theories or their methods will have very universal appeal. It will be suitable across the world. But in reality we know that how even মানে একই এটা যেরকম ইএলটি মেথোডোলজি যে আমার কোর্স অলদো ইটস নট ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ অলদো ইটস নট আ ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ কোর্স বাট আমি নিচ্ছি একভাবে ফারজানা আপা নিবেন আরেকভাবে অন্য আতিয়া নিলে আবার আরেকভাবে নিবে সো এই যে ইভেন মানে একই ইউনিভার্সিটি লেভেলের একটা কোর্স বাট এখানেও আমরা কিন্তু we can't really ensure similarity across different sections. It is not possible. So তাহলে ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ লার্নিং এর চিন্তা করো যেখানে ডিফারেন্ট স্টুডেন্টস ক্যান হ্যাভ ডিফারেন্ট নিডস এন্ড ডিফারেন্ট motivation altogether. In that case you cannot have a pre-selected idea or principle in your mind, and you cannot expect that it will be suitable or successful in a given situation. So it is very fact of considering West and their context to be the ideal one, therefore their way of teaching to be the ideal one, this very concept is problem. বুঝতে পেরেছি? তোমরা বুঝেছো যে what is the limitation in
Yes, ma'am.
equity? Okay. So এটাই বলছি যে and we also know the fact, we also are aware of the fact that how theorizers do not really have expertise in teaching. So they do not have expertise in real teaching, in real, they are not dealing with real students. এটাও কিন্তু একটা বড় ব্যাপার যে ওরা কিন্তু একদম রিয়েল লাইফে রিয়েল স্টুডেন্টের সাথে they are not dealing. Okay, as a predominantly top-down exercise, the conception and construction of methods have been largely guided by a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach that assumes a common clientele with common goals. So can you people see the highlight version? I'm just curious. দেখা যায়?
Yes, miss.
Highlight.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. So AJ, I think I have used this term before, like one size fits all cookie cutter approach. So my question to you is, if you look at the phrase one size fits all cookie cutter approach that assumes a common clientele with common goals, এখানে common clientele বলতে কাদের বোঝানো হচ্ছে?
Students there.
Very good. Thank you. I think after a long time I got the correct answer. অনেককে জিজ্ঞেস করলে ওরা ভাবে যে স্টুডেন্টরা, থিওরাইজার্সরা থিওরি বানাচ্ছে considering teachers to be the common client. হ্যাঁ, টিচাররা হচ্ছে যারা ইএলটি প্র্যাকটিশনার্স, they are the we know the term client, right? Who are the clients? Client কারা?
যাদেরকে কোনো সার্ভিস প্রোভাইড করা হয়।
যাদের কোনো সার্ভিস প্রোভাইড, very good. So clientele will be the group of clients, right? That's it. Clientele will be the group of clients. So theorists consider this group of people or the teachers who are the ELT practitioners to be the clientele. They're the common clientele. They have common goals. They want to teach English to a group of students. And we as the theorizers, our job is to give something which will be suitable in any context, and they're just going to consume it or adopt it as is. So এখানে কিন্তু অনেকগুলো ব্যাপার চলে আসে যখন একজন এটাকে কমন ক্লায়েন্টেল চিন্তা করছে। এখানে কিন্তু একটা ইকোনমিক্যাল অ্যাসপেক্টও চলে আসে যে দেখো, when we consider their context to be the ideal one, automatically we consider their textbook to be the ideal one, automatically we consider their teachers to be the ideal one, automatically we consider their speakers to be the ideal one. We consider that native speakers are the ideal speakers, the ideal way of learning English, or perhaps having pronunciation. We always try to achieve native like proficiency, and all these things are actually giving rise to this linguistic imperialism or educational imperialism, where economically they are getting richer and richer because we are referring to their books. Even যখন তোমরা যে কোনো রিসার্চ পেপার করো, we always ask you যে অক্সফোর্ড থেকে নিবে, কেমব্রিজ থেকে নিবে, দেন জেস্টোর থেকে নিবে আর্টিকেল, তার মানে কি আমাদের এদিকে কি কোনো স্টাডি হচ্ছে না, ইস্টে কি কোনো স্টাডি হচ্ছে না? হচ্ছে তো। বাট সিন্স উই হ্যাভ দিস কাইন্ড অফ belief, or let's say সেই hegemonic idea, we have already hegemonized the fact that okay, their learning way, their approach and all these things are the best one, therefore we have to also promote them and learn them. এই সবকিছু কিন্তু এই আইডিয়া থেকে, that how West considers the teachers, reality practitioners to be the common clientele. সো এই জন্যই কিন্তু বছরকে বছর ওরা নতুন নতুন বই বের করবে, নতুন নতুন এডিশন বের করবে এবং আমরা ওগুলো কিনবো, এবং এভাবেই দে আর the linguistic imperialism or the education imperialism are there because they are the beneficiary, they get benefited economically, right? We are the consumers here, the ELT practitioners, the teachers all in general, they are the common clientele here. So, not anchored in any specific learning and teaching context and caught up in the whirlwind of fashion, methods tend to wildly drift from one theoretical extreme to the another. এক সময় বলা হয় যে গ্রামারই ফোকাস করতে হবে, আবার বলা হয় যে ড্রিলিং এ ফোকাস করতে হবে, আবার বলা হয় যে না, গ্রামার পড়ানোর দরকার নেই, কমিউনিকেশন করো, আবার বলা যায় না কমিউনিকেশন দরকার নেই, বেশি দরকার হচ্ছে কি তোমার গ্রামারে ফোকাস দেওয়া। এই যে মনে হচ্ছে সারাক্ষণ পেন্ডুলামের মতো, ইউ হ্যাভ টু গো ইদার ওয়ান এক্সট্রিম টু অ্যানাদার। এগুলো কিন্তু সবকিছুই এই মেথডের লিমিটেশন, বিকজ অফ দ্য ফ্যাক্ট দ্যাট they are taking the teachers to be the common clientele, and they believe, the theorizers believe, that whatever we give, the teachers are supposed to adopt them. And I think by now we know the difference between adopt and adapt. So essentially, theorists believe that teachers or the common clientele will be there to consume or to adopt whatever they are proposing. And therefore, all the time they're proposing something. প্রত্যেকবারই কিন্তু খুব এক্সট্রিম হয় এবং তোমরা দেখেছো over the period of time the kind of methods we covered, you got to see. And Kumarabaduli talks about that how দেখো, not at one time grammatical drills were considered the right way to teach. At another, they were given up in favor of communicative tasks. At one time, explicit error correction was considered necessary. At another, it was frowned upon. So, কোনো সময় ওরা বলে যে গ্রামার ফোকাস করো, কোনো সময় বলে যে না কমিউনিকেশনে ফোকাস করো, কোনো সময় ওরা বলে যে না যখন ফিডব্যাক দিবে তখন তোমাকে একদম এরর কারেকশন করে দিতে হবে এক্সপ্লিসিটলি। কোন সময় বলে যে না তোমাদেরকে স্টুডেন্টদের পার্সপেক্টিভটা চিন্তা করতে হবে, ইউ হ্যাভ টু বি ব্যালেন্সড ইন টার্মস অফ গিভিং ফিডব্যাক অ্যাজ ওয়েল। সো এই যে প্রত্যেকবারই খুবই এক্সট্রিম, কোনোটাতে খুব বেশি ওভার এমফাসাইজ দেওয়া হচ্ছে, কোনো সময় একটা কমপ্লিটলি ইগনোর করা হচ্ছে, ডিপেন্ডিং অন হুইচ পেন্ডুলাম সুইংস, কোন দিকে পেন্ডুলাম, যেরকম ঘড়ির পেন্ডুলাম থাকে এক সময় এক দিকে দোল খায়, ঠিক সেরকম ভাবেই হয়তো বা থিওরিস্টরা যেদিকে যেতে বলছে টিচার্সরা সেদিকে যাবে, যে এখন গ্রামার পড়াচ্ছ, এখন গ্রামারে ফোকাস করো, অল উইল স্টার্ট টু ফোকাস অন দ্য গ্রামার, যে না গ্রামার ফোকাস পড়াতে হবে, কমিউনিকেশন করো, অল উইল ফোকাস অন দ্যাট। সো এই যে এই সবকিছু কিন্তু শর্টকামিংস of the concept of method, right? Yet another crucial shortcoming of the concept of method is that it is too inadequate, too limited to satisfactorily explain the complexity of language teaching. So bolche the concept of method is also very inadequate. It is not, let's say, it is not inclusive in the sense that it does not give voices to the teachers, it does not gives any solution how teachers can address problem in the classrooms, how teacher can manage large class sizes. All these things are not acknowledged, rather overlooked here. Therefore, another shortcomings is that how it is too inadequate and too limited to satisfactorily explain the complexity of language teaching. Right? Concerned primarily and narrowly with classroom instructional strategies, it ignores the fact that the success or failure of classroom instruction depends to a large extent on the unstated and unstable interaction of multiple factors such as teacher recognition, teacher cognition, learner perception, societal needs, cultural context, political exigencies, economic imperatives, and institutional constraints, all of which are inextricably interwoven. তো বলছি যে there can be thousands of variables depending on what can be different from one institute to another, and these pre-selected or pre-structured steps or procedures of methods are inadequate and very limited to actually acknowledge all these things. So এই লিমিটেশনের জন্যই কুমারাবাদুলি বাদুবুলু বলতে চান যে এই যে টার্মটা মেথড, এটা এই মেথডটা এই টার্মটা আসলে it is a label without substance. The term method is labeled without substance because it has too many pitfalls, too many flaws altogether, and it is too limited. So a method, a conceptটা শুধুমাত্র একটা নামই, it doesn't give us anything, right? So এটা এখানে একটু দেখো কি বলছে, the limitations of the concept of method gradually led to the realization that the term method is a label without substance. It's just a label, একটা নাম শুধু, but it does not really provide much because it's inadequate, it is not context sensitive, it does not take the teacher's voice into account, it does not take the contextual variables into account, which can vary in terms of each institute or from classroom to classroom. So it does not cover all these things or acknowledge all these things. Therefore, it is just a label without any substance. এবং খুব এক্সট্রিম কিছু কথা আছে এখানে, একটু যদি খেয়াল করো, that it also led to the realization that it has diminished rather than enhanced our understanding of language teaching. সো এই যে এই মেথড আসলে আমাদের যে ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ টিচিং সম্পর্কে আমাদের যে ধ্যান ধারণা, আমাদের যে কনসেপ্ট, এটাকে আসলে কনফাইন্ড করে দিয়েছে, এটাকে এনহ্যান্স করেনি, কনফাইন করে দিয়েছে, নষ্ট করে দিয়েছে। সো language teaching might be better understood and better executed if the concept of method were not to exist at all. এখন তোমরা আমাকে বলবে যে মিস এটা কি বলেন, পুরো একটা এলটি মেথোডলজির উপর কোর্স করার পরে যদি আমাদেরকে বলে যে মেথড না থাকলেই ভালো হতো, হ্যাঁ, তাহলে কেমন হয়?
মিস এই পুরো কোর্সে আমার এটাই মনে হয়েছে যে না থাকলেই ভালো হতো।
হ্যাঁ, তোমার তো মনে হয়েছে বিকজ তোমার পড়তে হতো না, এই জন্য মনে হয়েছে, তাই না?
ইয়েস মিস, বিকজ আমারও এটাই মনে হয়েছে যে সবগুলো এরকম ওভারল্যাপ করে, তখন অ্যাকচুয়ালি অনেক প্রবলেম মনে হয়েছে, সব তো সেমই।
ইয়া, সো এটাই বলছি যে ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজের টিচিংটা আরো আমরা ভালো মতো বুঝতে পারতাম, ভালো মতো এক্সিকিউট করতে পারতাম এই যদি এই মেথডের কনসেপ্টটাই যদি না থাকতো, যে তোমার ক্লাসিক্যালি কিছুগুলো ফিক্সড প্রিন্সিপাল থাকতে হবে, এগুলো মাথায় রেখে ক্লাস তোমার ডিজাইন করতে হবে, তোমার লেসন প্ল্যানগুলোর অবজেক্টিভ থাকবে, এগুলো অ্যাচিভ করতে হবে তোমাকে, if you are advocating for a fixed method you have to go for fixed techniques as well, এরকম যদি এত বেশি স্ট্রাকচারড, এত বেশি স্টেপস যদি না থাকতো তাহলে হয়তো বা ভালো হতো। এবং এই রিয়েলাইজেশন থেকেই there is a dissatisfaction with the concept of method, এই মেথড নিয়ে মানুষের একটা dissatisfaction তৈরি হয়, there is a dissatisfaction with the concept of method. দেখো আমরা যা যে পর্যন্ত পড়লাম তোমাদের একটা ধারণা হয়তো বা দিচ্ছে that how there is a dichotomy. Are we aware of the term dichotomy? Can anyone tell me what is the term dichotomy means?
distinguishment.
Distinguishment, হ্যাঁ বলা যায়, but as in difference, হ্যাঁ। So I think you get an idea that how there is a difference, there is a distinction, there is a dichotomy between theory and practice. আমরা যদি থিওরিটাকে ধরি, যেগুলো থিওরাইজার্সরা দিচ্ছে, অল দ্য মেসেজ যেগুলো আমরা পড়লাম, প্রিন্সিপালস গুলো, এগুলো যদি থিওরি ধরি and প্র্যাকটিস যদি ধরি যে আসলে টিচাররা ক্লাসরুমে কি করছে, if we consider these two terms we will see that there is a dichotomy, a theory practice dichotomy in terms of teaching language. So different people over the period of time they wanted to actually see that how real teachers are teaching in the classroom, and based on that they could come up with certain observations, এবং এই অবজারভেশনের বেস করেই কিন্তু কুমারবাদুলু বলছে যে ক্লেমটা তো খুব স্ট্রং একটা ক্লেম, তাই না? when you say that there are dissatisfactions among the teachers in terms of method, you need to have a rationale of saying this. So what Kumaravaddulu says that, over the period of time, by addressing certain research, he shows that how teachers practicing in the class and what kind of methods they are supposed to follow, how they are supposed to, quote unquote, supposed to take the class, there are differences, and which leads to the idea that there is a dissatisfaction with the method. সো মনে করো যে তুমি যদি মেথডকে ভালোই বাসো, মেথড একটা পার্টিকুলার মেথডকে যদি তুমি খুব ভালোই বাসো, তাহলে ইউ আর সাপোজড অ্যাজ আ টিচার, অ্যাজ অ্যান ইএলটি প্র্যাকটিশনার, ইউ আর সাপোজড টু ফলো ইট ইন টোটো, তাই না? যেভাবে তোমাকে বলা হচ্ছে তুমি সেভাবেই করবে, একদম অ্যাজ ইজ, ইউ উইল অ্যাডপ্ট ইট। বাট when based on the classroom practices that the researchers went and observed, তখন what are the findings? দেখো বুলেট পয়েন্টে দেওয়া আছে, teachers who are trained in and even swear by a particular method do not conform to its theoretical principles and classroom procedures. অফেন মনে করো একজন টিচার যাকে ট্রেনিং দেওয়া হয়েছে লেটস সে জিটিএম এর উপরে, এবং যাকে বলা হয়েছে তুমি জিটিএম ফলো করেই ক্লাস নিবে, অনেক সময় তারা সেই থিওরিটিক্যাল প্রিন্সিপাল এবং ক্লাসরুম প্রসিডিউর মানে না, মেনে চলে না। এটা এক ধরনের ফাইন্ডিং। আবার আরেক ধরনের ফাইন্ডিং পাওয়া গেছে যেখানে টিচার্স হু ক্লেম টু ফলো দ্য সেম মেথড often use different classroom procedures that are not consistent with the adopted method. অনেক ক্ষেত্রে আবার এরকমও দেখা গেছে যে some teachers who মনে প্রাণে হয়তো বা কমিউনিকেটিভ ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ টিচিং অ্যাপ্রোচটাকে বিলিভ করে এবং সেটাই ফলো করতে চায়, বাট যখন ক্লাসরুম অবজার্ভ করা হলো বা দেখা হলো তখন দেখা গেল যে দে আর নট রিয়েলি স্টিকিং টু দ্য সেম অ্যাপ্রোচ অর সেম মেথড, দে আর পারহ্যাপস taking different elements from different methods altogether. So that can be another observation. Another findings is that teachers who claim to follow different methods often use same classroom procedures. আবার এরকম গ্রুপ অফ টিচারও পাওয়া গেল যারা নিজেরা বলে হয়তো বা খুব এক্লেকটিক ওয়ে অফ টিচিং, অনেক ধরনের ডিফারেন্ট মেথড ফলো করে পড়ায়, বাট ক্লাসে গিয়ে দেখা গেল যে না ওরা আসলে জিটিএম ফলো করে পড়াচ্ছে। এটাও দেখা গেছে। দিস ইজ ওয়ান অফ দ্য অবজারভেশন as well. And last but not the least, one of the groups also showed that how teachers develop and follow a carefully delineated task hierarchy, a weighted sequence of activities not necessarily associated with any established method. So one of the findings is also that teachers themselves are coming up with a particular method which does not really follow any existing method. It is like something which they themselves are coming up with based on their day-to-day experience and also their expertise in the field of teaching. বুঝতে পেরেছো? So এই যে দেখো, if teachers were the common clientele in true sense, and if the teachers believed in a particular method, then ideally all the teachers would have had the same kind of teaching practices across the classes, right? But when the classes were observed, researchers found different kind of practices in the day-to-day life. So often teachers are not sticking to the particular method, often teachers are using different elements from different methods, often teachers are claiming to use different elements from different methods but they are actually using the same method, and often teachers are coming up with something absolutely different altogether, which is very specifically designed for his or her own class and based on the classroom experience and classroom practices that he or she is having in their classroom, which does not really associated with any established method. So এরকম বিভিন্ন ধরনের অবজারভেশন বা ফাইন্ডিংস পাওয়ার পরই the Kumara Vadivilu came into the conclusion that there is a dissatisfaction with the concept of method, and there is no doubt that there will be a dissatisfaction, but because there is a theory practice dichotomy. The way the theorizers are suggesting to use the language, to use the method, teachers are not really always sticking to that. So there is a theory practice dichotomy. So we can't overlook the fact that teachers who are taking the classes, they have their own judgment, they have their own expertise. Over the period of time they're also gaining experience, they know what works better, right? Even if a particular method perhaps very strongly denies the use of first language, a teacher can take the decision or would be better judge where to include, let's say, Bangla or elements of first language, right? So you can't really deny or completely ignore teachers' importance in the development of the language learning method or the whole process. So যেহেতু টিচারের ভয়েস এখানে একদমই নেই, যেহেতু টিচাররা ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ মেথড ডেভেলপমেন্ট প্রসেসে একেবারেই রোল প্লে করে না, সো অনেক সময় দেখা যায় যে বাট অন দ্য কন্ট্রারি দে আর দ্য অ্যাকচুয়াল users or they're the actual applicators of the methods ideally, so they are better able to understand how, in what way the language learning process can be made easier for the students, right? And therefore they take decisions based on what works in the classroom and what doesn't work. সো যেটা থিওরিস্টরা যেটা বলছে এবং টিচাররা যে একেবারে চোখ বন্ধ করে ব্লাইন্ড ফোল্ডেডলি সবকিছু মেনে চলবে, দ্যাট ইজ নট দ্য সিনারিও। And therefore there is a difference or there is a dichotomy between theory and practice. So যেভাবে করে theorizers চিন্তা করে যে their theory or their method will have a universal appeal, that is not the case. Contextual variables are there. um, Teachers can have different kind of experiences and they can come up with their own way of teaching as well. So all these things lead to the dissatisfaction, and all these things also show that how there is a theory practice dichotomy, right? থিওরির সাথে প্র্যাকটিসে, ক্লাসরুম প্র্যাকটিসের সাথে থিওরি টিচার মেথড থিওরাইজার্সরা যা বলে তার সাথে অনেক বেশি ডিফারেন্স আছে। এবং এই সব কিছু চিন্তা করার পরে what Kumara Vadavelu is saying, যে দেখো যে emerging gradually over the years, the accelerating duration during the last decade in critical thoughts that question the nature and scope of method and creative ideas that redefine our understanding of method. Having witnessed how methods go through endless cycles of life, death, rebirth, the language teaching profession seems to have reached a state of heightened awareness. An awareness that as long as we remain in the web of method, we will continue to get entangled in an unending search for an unavailable solution, that such a search drives us to continually recycle and repackage the same old ideas, and that nothing short of breaking the cycle can salvage the situation. Out of this awareness has emerged what I have called a post method condition. উনি বলছেন যে ওভার দ্য পিরিয়ড অফ টাইম এই যে এন্ডলেস সাইকেল, যে মেথড একটা আসে, লাইফ, তারপরে ও ইট ফেসেস ক্রিটিসিজম, তারপর ওকে বাদ দিয়ে ও ডেথ হয়, আবার আরেকটা মেথড আসে হয়তো বা সেম অর সিমিলার টাইপ অফ প্রিন্সিপাল দিয়ে, শুধুমাত্র একটা নতুন টার্ম দিয়ে, সো রিবার্থ। এই যে সাইকেল, লাইফ ডেথ আর সাইকেলের এই যে রিবার্থ অফ দিস মেথড, এইটার মধ্যে যতক্ষণ পর্যন্ত আমরা থাকবো, এই ওয়েব অফ মেথডে যতক্ষণ পর্যন্ত আমরা থাকবো, we will continue to get entangled in an unending search for an unavailable solution. We will try to keep on finding something যেটা আসলে খুঁজে পাবো না, because we will be always confined with the concept of principles and structure and method and technique and all these things, that we will not be able to think beyond, think out of the box. So we need to be coming up with certain things where it is a post method condition or post method era where there is no method at all. Okay people, so post method era there is no method. এটা এমন একটা era যেখানে কোনো method নেই. It talks about a concept or an idea where the condition is that there is no method at all. বিকজ যতক্ষণ পর্যন্ত আমরা মেথডের কনসেপ্টে থাকবো ততক্ষণ পর্যন্ত কিন্তু আমাদের সেই কনসেপচুয়ালাইজ কনস্ট্রাক্টেড স্টেপস প্রসিডিউরস আসবে, যেটা কোনো একটা থিওরিস্টরা দিবে, যেখানে টিচারদের কোনো কোনো রোল থাকবে না, খুবই they will be divorced from each other, the theorists and the practitioners will be divorced from each other, এরকম একটা কনসেপ্টের মধ্যেই আমরা থাকবো এবং ঘুরে ফিরে আমরা হয়তো ডিফারেন্ট টার্মে ডিফারেন্ট মেথড আনবো। যতক্ষণ পর্যন্ত না আমরা এর বাইরে যাব ততক্ষণ পর্যন্ত কিন্তু আমরা সেই একই vicious সাইকেলের মধ্যেই থাকবো, the life death and rebirth of different methods. So এখান থেকে বের হয়ে আসতে হলে we have to think out of the box, we have to be aware, and we have to come up with an idea where there is no method at all. And therefore he proposes the concept of post method condition. এখন থেকে আমাদের আসল পড়া শুরু হচ্ছে, যেখানে we are dealing with a kind of idea or condition where there is no method. এই পর্যন্ত সবাই বুঝেছো? So like I said that he came up with a groundbreaking idea, right? He just couldn't really talked about from the get-go. He actually tried to show the rationale. So he talked about the concept of method. He showed that how the methods can be classified. He talked about that how there is a there are limitations to the concept and how it kind of give rise to the dissatisfaction of the method. এরকম বলে তারপরে he talked about that how we should think going beyond, and we should come up with something where there should not be any method at all. So he had to rationalize his steps, and this is how he did. Does it make sense? এই পর্যন্ত সবাই কি বুঝতে পেরেছি কিনা? It একটু cognitively একটু challenging to I understand, but to see, I think it is also helpful. তুমি প্রথমেই পোস্ট মেথডটা না চিন্তা করে যদি তুমি প্রত্যেকটা গ্র্যাজুয়াল ডেভেলপমেন্টটা চিন্তা করো, তুমি তাহলে নিজেরাও দেখবে যে হাউ ইন দিস কোর্স উই হ্যাভ কাম আপ টিল নাও, অ্যাপ্রোচ, মেথড, ডিজাইন, কনসেপ্টগুলো পড়ে ডিফারেন্ট মেথড পড়ে পর্যন্ত আমরা এসেছি। এন্ড নাও উই নো যে আসলে কারা মেথডগুলো দিচ্ছে, কারা আসলে ইউজার্স, কিভাবে there are discrepancies or differences or distance altogether, and how the very concept of method is limiting, and how we can address this. Are we all clear till this page?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Good. Now Kumara Vadivelu talks about post method condition, এবং এই post method condition এর প্রথম যে ব্যাপারটা, এটা কিছু ফিচার্স বা অ্যাট্রিবিউট আছে যেখানে উনি তিনটা ফিচার কথা বলছেন। আমরা পোস্ট মেথড কন্ডিশন পড়বো, যেখানে we will talk about 3 interrelated attributes. আমরা পোস্ট মেথড পেডাগজির কথা বলবো, ওখানেও হচ্ছে কি তিনটা প্যারামিটারের কথা বলবো, 3 প্যারামিটারস। সো দুটোই তিনটা করে। So there is a very good chance যে আমি তোমাদেরকে অ্যাট্রিবিউট লিখতে বললে তোমরা প্যারামিটার লিখবে, আমি তোমাকে প্যারামিটার লিখতে বললে তোমরা অ্যাট্রিবিউট লিখবে। সো এগুলো একটু বোঝার চেষ্টা করো। পোস্ট মেথড কন্ডিশন signifies 3 interrelated attributes. এক নম্বরে কি? এক নম্বরে হচ্ছে গিয়ে in a post method condition there will be a search for an alternative to method rather than an alternative method. So দেখো, in case of method আমরা পড়ে এসেছি that how একটা মেথডের পর একটা মেথড আসছে, we are trying to figure out how we can address one pitfall of one method, and ওটা অ্যাড্রেস করি হয়তো পরে আরেকটা মেথড আসছে, এভাবে করি তো একটার পর একটা মেথড আসছে। বাট ইন আ পোস্ট মেথড কন্ডিশন it talks about a search for an alternative to method rather than an alternative method. এর মানেটা কি? What does it mean actually? কি মনে হয়? What does it mean? So it encourages us not to think of an alternative method. GTM এর জায়গায় ALM আসলো, ALM এর জায়গায় direct method আসলো, direct method এর জায়গায় silent way আসলো, এভাবে চিন্তা না করে it encourages us to think that what can take place in the place of method. এই মেথডের জায়গায় altogether কি আসতে পারে, how we can go beyond the concept of method. এই মেথডটা কি, we don't want the method, we rather want an alternative to method. এবং এই জন্যই কিন্তু he talks about that there should not be any method. So while alternative methods are primarily products of top-down processes, alternatives to method are primarily products of bottom-up approaches. In practical terms, we need to refigure the relationship between the theorizers and practitioner of the language teaching. তো উনি বলছেন, দেখো উনি কিন্তু ডিনাই করছে না the importance of having theoretical knowledge. Language learning and teaching into theoretical knowledge, এটা essential. He is not completely denying the fact, but he is suggesting that there should be a happy marriage between theory and practice. There should not be dichotomy. There should be a happy marriage between theory and practice. Theorizers and practitioners যে রিলেশনশিপটা, যেটা completely overlooked and ignored ছিল in case of existing method, Kumara Vadivelu is suggesting that in a post method condition we need to refigure how to have a good relationship between theorizer and practitioners, right? যেখানে মেথডের ক্ষেত্রে যেখানে theorizers-রা used to construct their own method based on their theoretical knowledge and expertise, in a post method condition the teachers should also need to come up with their own decision making, with their own theory making process. ওদেরকেও ভ্যালু দিতে হবে, because you can't completely ignore the importance of experience, the practices that the teachers are achieving through their day-to-day teaching. So first and foremost, in a post method condition it tries to identify or figure out an alternative to method as opposed to an alternative method. It tries to refigure the relationship between the theorizers and the practitioner. তো বলছে যে থিওরি যেটা বলছি আমরা যেটা whatever we come up as a theory should have practical use, and at the same time whatever we are using as a teacher we are using in the practical class should be part of the theory. It is like, you know, a good cycle যে তুমি ওটাই তোমার পার্টে থিওরি, you know, the you as a teacher come up with a theory based on the classroom practices that you are having, and at the same time your theory is also getting informed by the classroom. So it is, there is no difference or there is no dichotomy, rather both are informing each other. I am, as a teacher, I am coming up with a theory based on my day-to-day classroom teaching practices. So my theory is also very practical in the sense. বুঝতে পারছো? So যেখানে in case of method the theorizers were completely aloof from the day-to-day teaching experience, in a post-method condition teachers or ELT practitioners are also given opportunities so that they can also generate their own theory based on their classroom practices. I think it summarizes what I wanted to say, but does it make sense to you people?
Yes, miss.
Okay, good. So that is the first attribute. The second attribute is a post method condition signifies teacher autonomy. Teacher autonomy, যেহেতু আমরা জানি যে in case of conventional method making there is no voice or no opportunities given to the teachers so that they can also be part of the theory making. In terms of post method condition টিচারদেরকে অটোনমি দেওয়া হয়। অটোনমি দেওয়া হচ্ছে where they should be able to act or to teach autonomously within the academic and administrative sphere or domain. So if it is related to the curriculum or syllabus or which textbook to take or which particular chapter to teach or how to approach it, all these things in day-to-day life students should be given um, power to some extent so that they themselves can take the decision. So often we all know that there are some administrative constraints that teachers go through. Let's say it can be a fixed syllabus, it can be a fixed time frame, it can be that how an institute want to get, let's say, a certain amount of CGPA, a certain amount of A plus students, and they all want to gear towards that. But in a post method condition, teachers will be given autonomy so that they can take decisions of how to approach these things. They should be able to take decisions how to teach first and foremost, and also to make academic as well as administrative, they should be able to address the academic and administrative constraints in terms of, let's say, curriculum, textbook, testing practice, and all these things, right? And last but not the least, the third attribute is a principled pragmatism. All these terms are very new, I know, and therefore this chapter is a very different one, but I think it is also very eye-opening, right? The third attribute that post-method condition talks about is the principled pragmatism. It talks about যে আমরা eclectic approach সম্পর্কে পড়েছি, আমরা পড়েছি যে how different methods have certain strengths and weaknesses, and a teacher can identify the strengths and come up with his or her own blend of teaching methods. We have talked about all these things, but even in that case Kumar Avadavilu thinks that there is a constraint. We can, you know, if you do not have a principle in mind, if the amalgamation of different concepts are not done in a principled manner, then it becomes haphazard. So in a post method condition, all the teaching practices will be based on the relationship between theory practice, the relationship between ideas and their actualization. So all these things should be practically informed, and all these things should be done in a principled manner. So the teacher will always reflect on his or her teaching, will always go back and think, acha আমি আজকে যে এই জিনিসটা এভাবে পড়ালাম এটা কতটা সাকসেসফুল হয়েছে, can I address this, can I include this, should I do this, should I do this changes and all these things. And this is called reflective teaching, where as a teacher you are self observing, self analyzing, self evaluating. All these things are there. So, you know, if you consider the conventional method, you are supposed to just follow certain steps and follow certain procedures and you are done. But in case of a post method condition, you as a teacher, you are given autonomy, but at the same time you are encouraged to have reflective teaching. You are encouraged to ask yourself whether your teaching way kind of help students, or you can bring about some changes to address the students needs, right? So it encourages the students to constantly or continuously reflect on his or her own teaching, to constantly self observe, self analyze, self evaluate, and bring about changes if necessary. And that is how it encourages to practice to practice the teacher's principled pragmatism. সো অনেক কিছু এখানে আসছে থিওরি প্র্যাকটিসের মধ্যে একটা রিলেশনশিপ থাকবে, থিওরি আর ক্লাসরুম প্র্যাকটিসের মধ্যে একটা সুন্দর রিলেশনশিপ থাকবে বা একটা সুন্দর ব্যালেন্স থাকবে, বাট এট দ্য সেম টাইম দ্য টিচার শুড do reflective teaching where they will self evaluate, self analyze, and self observe so that they can bring about important changes to their teaching and they can evolve as a teacher as well. সো এই তিনটা হচ্ছে কি অ্যাট্রিবিউট অফ দ্য পোস্ট মেথড কন্ডিশন। এ পর্যন্ত আমরা কি বুঝেছি?
Yes, miss.
আর ছোট্ট একটা কনসেপ্ট আছে, ডু ইউ ওয়ান্ট মি টু এক্সপ্লেন ইট নাও? আই ক্যান এক্সপ্লেন ইট নাও অ্যান্ড দেন পারহ্যাপস ওয়ান্স উই মিট অন দ্য 10th, যদি তোমরা ফেস টু ফেস আমাকে আরেকবার বলে দিতে বলো তাহলে আই উইল এক্সপ্লেন again, but if you think it's too much I can stop here. We are just left with one small concept, which are the parameters. The parameters গুলো পড়লেই we are done from this chapter. Should I go on?
সানডেতে এক্সপ্লেন করলে
No,
বেটার
ma'am.
হয়।
আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে।
Yes.
Okay, so let's stop here. Just to briefly talk about what we have covered so far, we are covering post method condition by Kumaravadi Velu. But before we talk about that, she showed us first and foremost what is the concept of method and how we can classify different methods according to the different definitions by three categories. And he showed us that how the concept of method is actually has certain limitations and which gives rise to certain dissatisfaction, and how this can be addressed. According to him, this can be addressed through a post method condition where it is an era where there is no method at all. And essentially he talks about that in a post method condition it will have three attributes or three characteristics. First and foremost, it will try to identify something which is an alternative to method as opposed to an alternative method. So it will not repeat the history of finding out an alternative method, rather it tries to figure out if we can completely ignore method altogether, and if we can come up with something where there will be a balance or connection between theorizers and practitioners, so there is a good relationship between theorizers and practitioners. And therefore the first one is the concept of an alternative to method. It talks about that, and all these things are quite interconnected, people. So the second attribute he talks about that how in a post method condition it should advocate for teacher autonomy. So it gives emphasis on teacher's own experiences that he or she gains through classroom practices. So it talks about that how theory and practice should not be divorced from each other. Rather, a teacher should have, of course, the theoretical knowledge of second language acquisition and language acquisition altogether, and all these things will inform him or her to have classroom practices. But at the same time, the teacher should be able to come up with his or her own theory based on the classroom practices that he or she is having, right? So it should be a good connection or good relationship between theory and practice. And last but not the least, it also talks about principled pragmatism, where the teachers are encouraged to constantly or continuously reflect on his or her own teaching, where they will self evaluate, self observe, and self kind of analyze their classroom teaching practices so that they can improve their teaching for the sake of learners, of course, so that their teaching caters to the needs of the learners altogether. So that's the brief summary of this chapter. I encourage you to go through the chapter. It's a fascinating chapter, and when it came into being, it was very groundbreaking because all the time people were, of course, when there is a existing established uh, way of teaching which were there and which were established for such a long time, to come up with a idea where it completely nullifies, completely ignores, completely denies the existence of method or the concept of method, it was groundbreaking, right? So the very concept, একটু মানে ধরাটা একটু কঠিন, একটু চ্যালেঞ্জিং as well, but একটু abstractly চিন্তা করলে I think it makes sense, if you are confined within this all. He's not denying the importance of how people learn language, what are the theory that we have covered, let's say unitism, behaviorism, and all these things, or how people actually learn any language, whether if they are having, let's say, relaxed environment, if they're learning the second language in the same way they learn their first, all these things that we know about language learning. He's not denying these things. He's just suggesting that if you keep practitioners or teachers who are supposed to teach, who are dealing with students in day-to-day life, if you keep them completely aloof, completely ignored from the process of theory making, there is no way you can ensure the success of any method. And hence, one after another we get to see so many methods, because ultimately teachers are dissatisfied with this constructed and very confined way of teaching, and many a times they are coming up with their own theory, and therefore he is suggesting that perhaps it is better not to have any method altogether, and we should have an alternative to method, which is the post method condition. Okay, let me stop here and ask you if you have any observation or any question. What do you think? Isn't it
Ma'am,
clear?
I didn't understand the third condition of the post method era.
So so you were talking about the attribute, yeah? Post method attribute, my characteristics of a post method condition. The third one talks about principled pragmaticism.
Yeah,
Yeah,
miss.
যখনই কোনো principled ওয়ার্ডটা আসে, তার মানে হচ্ছে কি it should not be done randomly, right? So whenever you as a teacher, perhaps you are thinking of changing something in the classroom, in your day-to-day life, it should be based on your own observation, your own, and not because some other theorists are suggesting something you are changing your way of teaching. It should not be the case. The kind of practical way of teaching that you are having should be effective, and should not, you as a teacher should not blindfoldedly follow a strict rule or strict ideas proposed by someone else who doesn't have any expertise in this field. Rather, it talks about a principled pragmatism, where it gives importance to the teacher's day-to life experience, and it gives importance to teacher's judgment as well. It talks about that how through reflective teaching a teacher can bring about changes in his or her own teaching through self observation, self analysis, and self evaluation. So এরকম কোনো কথা কিন্তু এই পর্যন্ত যতগুলো মেথড আমরা পড়েছি কোথাও কিন্তু আসেনি, কোথাও কিন্তু বলা হয়নি যে টিচার যদি মনে করে যে এটা কাজ হচ্ছে না বা এটা 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 ইফেক্টিভ হচ্ছে না, দে ক্যান ব্রিং অ্যাবাউট চেঞ্জেস। কোথাও কিন্তু বলিনি আমরা। প্রত্যেকটা মেথডে আমরা দেখেছি 10টা 12টা 15টা প্রিন্সিপাল বলেছে, টেকনিক দেখিয়েছে, এবং দিজ আর দ্য থিংস দ্যাট টিচার্স আর সাপোজ টু ফলো। But in post method condition, it gives emphasis on reflective teaching. The teachers can reflect on his or her own teaching. He or she can, rather than sticking to a single manner of teaching, a teacher can always observe and evaluate and analyze his or her own teaching through reflection. And then this will ensure principled pragmatism. যে একটা টিচার প্র্যাকটিক্যালি যে ক্লাস নিচ্ছে, সেই ডিসিশন গুলো র্যান্ডম না, rather decision gula of course based on his or her theoretical knowledge as well as the practical experiences that he or she is gathering. So through the practical experience, through the reflective teaching, the teacher is being aware what are the changes or what are the adjustments he or she can bring about to make the class more effective for the students. That is the principled pragmatism. বুঝতে পারছি এখন একটু?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. So like I said, all these things are very connected. Just the way in the very first point or the very first attribute talks about that there should be an alternative to method, and in order to do that there should be a connection between theory and practice. So we get to see that how in principled pragmatism the teachers are encouraged to generate their own theory based on the practice, and how you can do it if you do not reflect. আজকে যদি আমি তোমাদেরকে জিজ্ঞেস না করি বা তোমাদের ইভ্যালুয়েশন না পাই যে মিস লেটস সে ফর ইনস্ট্যান্স মিস ক্লাসের মধ্যে শুধু ইংরেজিতেই লেকচার দিয়েছে বাট আমরা কিছু বুঝিনি, এই ফিডব্যাকটা যদি আমি না পাই বা এই ফিডব্যাকটা যদি আমি আমলে না নিই, তাহলে কিন্তু আমি যতবার 3G4 নিব আই উইল হ্যাভ দ্য সেম কাইন্ড অফ টিচিং প্র্যাকটিস, and same group of people will always complain that okay, the teacher is taking the class completely in English and perhaps we are struggling to understand few difficult concepts. But if I evaluate or observe or analyze and identify that okay, sometimes students are better, um, uh, in a better, perhaps students get to understand things better if I perhaps switch in between two languages once in a while, then perhaps it will be much more helpful for the students. So এই যে ডিসিশনটা আমি নিলাম, কিভাবে নিলাম, কেন নিলাম, based on my reflection, based on addressing, based on my self evaluation, self evaluation and self observation and self analysis. But I'm sure, I don't know whether you had any experience, but back in our days we used to have teachers, and often we were so irritated with student evaluation. আমরা অনেক সময় চিন্তা করতাম এই ইভ্যালুয়েশন দিয়ে কি হবে, আমরা যে এতবার বলি এটা তো কাজে লাগে না, the teacher remains the same and he takes the class in the same manner, there is no change um, altogether. So in terms of post method condition, it gives an opportunity to the teacher to reflect and see and identify in what manner, in what way he or she can better cater to the need of the students. And it is done not haphazardly, rather in a principled manner, where a teacher tries to make sure there is a connection between theory and practice. The teacher tries to make sure that, whatever is practical, মানে থিওরিটা র্যান্ডম না, থিওরিটা প্র্যাকটিক্যালি করে based on the experience that he or she gathers, he or she comes up with her own theory. And also he or she keeps enough flexibility to adjust his or her own way of teaching through self evaluation, self examination, self observation, through reflective teaching. I hope কিছু হলেও বুঝেছো. Like I said, hopefully we can give an overview on Saturday once we have a face-to-face class. Also, since that will be our last class, I encourage you to go through all the chapters and identify any problems that you have. But what I feel, since you have taken quizzes on most of the chapters as well as mid, আমার কাছে মনে হয় পোস্ট মেথডটাই হয়তো বা একটু একটু তোমাদের টাইম লাগতে পারে টু হ্যাভ এক্সপ্লেনেশন এন্ড আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ডিং। বাট তারপরে যদি এরকম হয় যে কোনো একটা চ্যাপ্টারের কোনো একটা কনসেপ্ট তোমাদের বুঝতে একটু সমস্যা হচ্ছে বা ইউ ওয়ান্ট মি টু এক্সপ্লেইন अगेन, I can do it, but I encourage you to come up with the problem, come up with with your pointers so that you can ask and we can use the time more efficiently and we can cover whatever we want to cover. For the finals, the whole chapters, all the chapters that we have covered will be included. But like I always mention that we try to, when we set the question, we try to keep a 70-30 or 30-70 kind of balance. So 30% from the pre-meet and 70% from the post-meet. So we try to do it. But all the chapters are included. Therefore, I encourage you to go through or scan through all the chapters and see if you have any questions so that we can discuss on Sunday. But like I mentioned, যে পোস্ট মেথড একটা খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট কনসেপ্ট, পোস্ট মেথড প্যারামিটার্স, এটা আমরা এখনো পড়িনি, এটা আমরা ইনশাল্লাহ সানডেতে ওয়ান্স উই মিট we will discuss inshallah. Any question, people? কারো কোনো কোয়েশ্চেন আছে? No. Let me quickly take your attendance and then you are good to go. And ponder upon this. আমার কাছে মনে হয় যে it's very groundbreaking and it's very fascinating, the concept of post method. So একটু পড়লে তোমাদের কাছে আমার কাছে মনে হয় যে you will find it very interesting. Okay. Yanur Zerine,
Yes, ma'am.
Faria Haq,
Yes, ma'am.
Adi Ashraf,
Present.
Misratul Kubra,